Hello and welcome to the Virtual Arena. Today we're going to be looking at how banks are adapting to a more innovative, transparent payment data landscape. I'm Doug Mackenzie and I'm joined on this episode by Nordea's Tino Kam and Intix's Casterman. Guys, thank you so much for joining. It's great to have you both on the show. Tino, can I start off with you? How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, thank you. Thank you, Doug. It's a great day here in Copenhagen. It is rainy and windy and it's almost summer, so all good, thank you.
No change there. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Tino. And Andre, how are you doing?
Very good. Great to be here with you, Doug.
So guys, today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking all about all that change in payment data and what it's going to mean for the banks and your clients. So guys, with that in mind, could I ask you to give a bit of background to your roles at your organizations? Tino, if I start with you, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm heading up the product team in transaction banking Nordea, and within our transaction banking offering, we obviously have the basic things like cash management and payments, but we are also looking at from a consumer cards perspective, a commercial cards perspective, and the traditional trade finance type of offering. And obviously there's so much happening from an account-to-account payment perspective, and it is quite exciting times to be in the industry right now.
I completely agree. It's an industry that seems to be completely different to how it was looking maybe 20 years ago. And Andre, following on from that, can we get a bit of background to yourself and Intix, please?
Yes, sure. So my name is Casterman. I'm a Chief Marketing Officer at Intix. At Intix, we are helping banks increase accessibility and tracking of transactions. So we are definitely working with the large banks to make sure they improve their internal operations in support of cross-border payments and other types of transactions. So it's all about helping banks cope with legacy systems and making transaction data more accessible and more traceable.
Interesting. Now, I think if we stick with you then, Andre, for the first question, I really feel that payments are getting very innovative. You know, we're starting to expand on that data set. So especially when it comes to cross-border payments, actually. So what do you think are the major innovations when it comes to cross-border payments? And do you think that the banks are effectively investing in those innovations?
Well, indeed, as I told you, 2 decades at SWIFT, and not much happened really in cross-border payments. It was all around SWIFT is the major channel for cross-border payments. Correspondent banking is the major practice for cross-border payments. And I must admit, not much happened really around changing the way payments are processed over those years I spent there. But things have changed drastically over the last 5 years. And this is where indeed new entrants came into the cross-border payment space. New practices were created, first sometimes at domestic level, sometimes at regional level, like in the pan-European area. And we see now so many new options in cross-border payments, so many new entrants. And just to name a few, SWIFT itself, of course, reacted to those new entrants with GPI, which is a major one we should highlight here. But banks also get organized around regional initiatives on the SEPA side, on the Nordic side with P27, and also we can expect more and more in the future with central banks innovations and central bank digital currencies, which are introducing even more advanced ways to handle money, possibly more on the retail side, but also definitely on the cross-border side. So I think it's all about getting payments to be handled faster and being cheaper. And for that purpose, there are different ways to get there in order to improve the current models or to introduce completely new models into the market. So fascinating space, I must say, since the 2016-17 timeframe.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Tino, I'd love to get your perspective there. Obviously, Andre highlighted the P27 payment system in the Nordics. I mean, do you really feel like Nordea is kind of grappling with this kind of interesting cross-border landscape that we're now seeing too?
But yeah, absolutely, and I agree with Andre and with you, Doc. I think there are so many, let's say, global initiatives to make the cross-border experience much more smooth and remove the blockers we had in the old ways of making cross-border payments through SWIFT. But to your point, one of the initiatives indeed is where we as Nordea are very much involved is the P27 initiative in the Nordic region, where our ambition is to create the first, let's say, instant cross-border, multi-currency, multi-country instant payment rails from an account-to-account perspective, and with the 4 countries, with the 4 currencies, including euro. So what we're trying to achieve there is making it a true cross-border experience in an instant way, and as well making sure that we create infrastructure which is efficient, scalable, and effective and compliant. Because I think so a lot of these innovations and developments are happening as we speak, obviously, and a lot of these innovative solutions have been triggered by fintech companies, and which have been really able to fill a niche need in the market. With P27 is where we want to make sure that we establish a scalable, modern, and regional solution from an instant payment perspective. Making sure that we have a secured and trusted and resilient solution for consumers and corporates and financial institutions. So we are Nordea and 5 other banks in the region have been supporting the P27 initiative from day one, and this is one of the, let's say, from an infrastructure and from a payment perspective, one of the key, let's say, changes what's happening in the region, and which is quite excited to be part of.
Yeah, I think you touched on a brilliant point there. Both of you actually. It's this kind of the very infrastructure itself is changing to enable these exciting innovations. Andre, you brought up Swift GPI, which we're obviously going to touch on later on as well. But one of the major important points about Swift GPI is the fact that we're starting to see that the transaction data is getting richer from each one of these each one of these payments. So Andre, can I ask, now that payment transactions are containing this rich data set, what are the major challenges that maybe banks might face when trying to make use of such transaction data?
So indeed, we see many innovations, and actually one of the challenges for banks is indeed to follow the pace of change, but also to consider that at technology level and at operational level, there is always new technology being added in the front office, in the back office, mainly in the back office actually, but none of the legacy technology is going away. Nothing is going away. It's always more instruments, real-time, pan-European payments, or cross-border payments, or Swift GPI, but it's always more, never trying to rationalize what has been done so far. So as part of those changes, the standards are also being enhanced. Cross-border payments were mainly around the MT standards over the years, and that contains some data, but limited data in a way, just what was needed. Now, with ISO 20022, there are richer data being processed, being exchanged between banks, and that is accessible now for various types of processes, like reconciling payments with invoices, for instance. Now, all this data is being swallowed by banks, stored in different systems, but then it's all about getting access to that data. That is another technical challenge that banks face. And this is where, on the Intix side, we are quite focusing on this technical challenge to access the data, to link the data sets and make them meaningful for a particular process. An example of a process is basically just enabling customer service teams, compliance teams to access those transactions and knowing precisely what is the latest status of a particular transaction, or generating reports in order to respond to ad hoc regulatory or recurring regulatory requirements. So all of those data sets are recorded by banks, but often in different systems. And one of the basic, you could think this is quite strange, but it's still a reality that many banks face, is this technical accessibility to the data that remains a major challenge. And once this is sorted, many different use cases we're going to talk about can be implemented.
And sorry, Tino, I think that's where I want to bring you in, because Nordea, you're a large organization, but it's so interesting to see how innovative you are as an institution. Can you tell me some of those kind of use cases that maybe Andre was alluding to that already Nordea can make use of, from making that data a bit more easier to read?
Yes. So I think it's quite exciting that we now try to use the ISO standard both for cross borders and domestic, and for instant, and for all the, let's say, payment flows. Not only, I think I want to add to that, it's not only about the payment initiation, but the whole, let's say, the payment flow, right? Acknowledgements and notifications and those type of things, that we have a kind of standard way to report back the payment status. But more important also, on how do we report back that the payment has been made finally, and that we are reporting back into the account states back to corporates and customers in a standard way as well, in a much more richer way. So obviously with that data, there are a number of, let's say, very relevant use cases we trying to explore. And first of all, I think we try to make sure that we as banks are even more secure and compliant from a payment perspective. We want to make sure that the payments we are processing are from an KYC, from an AML, and from a compliant perspective are compliant, and that we make sure that the customers we deal with can trust their money with us, and can trust us with the payments we make for them. So that's one, is making sure that the infrastructure is even more secure and trusted as we currently have. The second part, I think, is much more on what are we going to build on top of the infrastructure, right? So then there are a number of areas where we are obviously continuously looking how we can add value to our customers. And then there are many areas. There are more the traditional areas where we as an industry have been struggling with for many years. Is about reconciliation from a treasury and cash management perspective, making sure that we understand our accounts payables and accounts receivables, and understanding our cash position, understanding our the risk function from a corporate treasury perspective, and all those functions will benefit from a much more richer data. But that's the more, let's say, traditional customer pain point from a corporate treasury perspective, and for sure ISO XML will for sure further improve our capabilities towards the customer needs. But then on top of that, we are also looking at new use cases, right? Because there we can make use of the data, as Andre is saying, to offer our customers insights about not only where their payments is, where their payment is stuck, or where the payment is rejected or accepted, and tracking it and trace it, obviously, from a customer perspective, but also make sure that we use the data from a business insight perspective. So we could look at how we obviously looking then at embedding the payment information to business functions from a corporate perspective. So where are my goods? Is the payment done to the beneficiary? Did I receive my treasury payments in time, etc., etc.? So we are very much now looking at, let's say, how we can add even more value to our customers using the data available.
I think that's going to be so critical to the changing role of a bank as payments as a role change within the bank, lower value, higher volume. We are going to have to see that added value come from a payment. Now, you guys have both brought up the international standard, and Andre, if I could come to you with this one, can you tell us a bit more about the ISO 20022 initiative, what it's going to mean, especially for international banks, but payments in particular?
Yes, definitely. It's all about making sure data is structured as much as possible so it can be integrated into automated processes. And those automated processes could be serving the bank's needs. We can talk about this, or the client needs, as Tino just explained. So ISO 20022 migration is definitely key in order to convey more information with the payment instruction or with the statement reporting, and making sure that free text information is less and less used as part of the formats that are proprietary and used at country level or Swift on the SwiftNet, still on the Swift network, like the MT standards we know since the 70s. So it's a critical migration, and that is going to happen in the short term. That will impact the internal systems again, and various processes that information systems such as Intix also can use to serve the bank's needs, such as, for instance, tracking payment status across the internal bank value chain. When payments are processed, indeed, as Tino just said, it's important for the bank to give visibility on the payment status to the clients via e-banking portal, for instance. And in order to track the status of that payment, the more structured data the bank can handle with ISO 20022, the better it can the more it can provide visibility to the operations team, the internal users, but also to the external users. Of course, much can be done with the existing MT formats or with proprietary formats, but the move to ISO 20022 will provide much more access to data from a business point of view, more structured data, and will support a number of use cases, such as treasury processes Tito was talking about, but also more operational use cases, such as tracking internal processing of payments, so really within the bank own environment.
Yeah, and I guess with that in mind then, Tino, you've also brought up this kind of wealth of changes that it might bring, having that increased data transparency. But one thing I think is quite interesting is now that we've talked about how it's going to help your clients, but also Andre was touching on how it can help your employees as well, just kind of navigate this increasing volume, navigate this incredibly interesting payments landscape. So can I ask how you think that this increased transparency is going to help your colleagues navigate this exciting payments landscape?
Yeah, so I think what we will see is that we can further develop automation of our processes. Both from a bank's perspective and from a customer perspective. So with that automation, using the data and in the richer message, we are able to automate processes both from an AML perspective or from a bank process perspective, but also for our customers. And with that enablement of further automation, we are reducing risk. We are reducing risk from a bank's perspective, understanding our own position, understanding where we have potential issues with rejected payments. But the same applies again for our customers. With the automation, we are improving that they are able to manage their risk in a better way. And with that, with the automation, with the better controls from a risk perspective, we can free up time for both for our corporates and customers, but also for banks. So then we can, with freeing up time, it's not only for me, it's not only from a cost perspective, but also much more from an value-adding so how we can add more value towards our customers. So in that perspective, then, with freeing our time, we can better support our customers and try to better understand them and try to better add value to their processes. So with this, it will come improved controls, improved risk management, automation, and be more cost effective, but also obviously freeing up time to make sure that we can support our customers even better.
I'm really excited to hear how these changes in infrastructure, have this brilliant knock-on effect to just create value throughout the whole chain. And Andre, if I could come to you as well, with the same question I asked Tino, how are we seeing the front office be more streamlined, the back office being more streamlined? How is that all that technology coming together to kind of provide that single window access that maybe organizations and institutions would have been dreaming of, especially multinational ones, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, one has to accept that in so far, or until 2016-17, before the GPI rollout and so on, that the cross-border payments processes were quite opaque, and sometimes hiccups occurred in terms of delays, in terms of failed transactions, and it was very hard, not only for corporate clients but also for banks, to track the status of those transactions. Not all transactions had issues, but it was really like yes, it's being processed. You just have to wait and see when it's going to get onto the beneficiary's account, and this is now becoming unacceptable. Why has it been sudden change? Is just because there are new ways to process cross-border payments introduced by those new entrants I was referring to at the beginning. So the incumbent providers like large banks, as well as SWIFT, which is supporting the correspondent banking system, reacted and tackled the issue of tracking transactions across borders and doing that at a granular level. Now, one has to recognize that this is definitely helping banks to know what is happening at the level of their correspondence. But the most important, often for corporate clients, is to know what is happening within the bank itself, within the chosen banking partners. So you have tracking and transparency at cross-border level operated by SWIFT GPI in support of a more transparent correspondent banking system. And you have actually a need for banks to also track their internal processing, because this is where much value, as Tino was saying, can be offered to their clients in order to offer transparency really from an internal perspective, not only from a correspondent banking perspective. So once you assemble the two, an Intix tracking, if I can put it this way, within the bank, and an external cross-border tracking through SWIFT GPI, as an example, you can offer really full tracking, full visibility of individual payments to your corporate clients, and this can be offered through the web portals of the banks. So we're moving away then from an opaque environment that corporates had to accept over the years, over the decades, since correspondent banking was automated on SWIFT, to a much more transparent and augmented environment, because SWIFT GPI is not coming with enhanced transparency, but also improved processes. New norms are being established for payments to be processed faster and in a more transparent way, not only from a processing, but also from a fee perspective. So this is really improvement for banks themselves, for their own operations, but also immediately directly to their corporate clients as well via the e-banking portals.
Interesting. Now, Tino, Andre was focusing a lot there on the kind of operations side of things, as per his role. I'm interested from your perspective now, how can those operational streamlinings actually go on to then provide strategic value within a bank? Go on and see that bigger picture What's that going to do for Nordea, and what can we expect to see from you guys because of this value added for your customers going forward in terms of strategy?
Yeah. So one of the things where we're looking at is obviously to be a better digital bank for our customers. To be 24/7 times 365, have real-time connectivity and notifications for our customers, and be fully self-service and digital for our customers. And then this development from a cross-border perspective, the whole tracking and tracing and the understanding where your payment is and what the status is of the payment, very much sits in that, is very much enabling that digitalization of our offering, either through our own portals, but also obviously through more, let's say, open banking, premium API type of solutions, where customers can connect if they want to, go traditionally to our online portals, but if they are more sophisticated, they can make use of APIs to understand basically where their payment is, and track and do the tracking and tracing themselves. So this is very much in line with our strategy to become more digital, to ensure more self-service capabilities, and to offer an omni-channel offering towards our customers. Do they want to enter the branch, pick up the phone, go to our online portal, or make use of our APIs to retrieve the same information? I think that's the strategic goal from a Nordea perspective. And this, obviously, the developments we were just discussing are very much supporting the cross-border experience from a customer perspective.
Yeah, and it does seem to become more prevalent cross-border as the world reconnects after maybe a year or so of closing doors. Now, Tino, if I could stay with you for one more question as well, because I am aware we have to start wrapping up. I'm interested in looking at Nordea's approach, because you are an international organization, looking at the way that you can implement those strategies. Are we starting to look at a waterfall approach, a modular approach? I'm really interested in your guys' workflow from coming from such a large organization.
Well, I think banks like Nordea always have. We are always doing things too slow, and it costs always too costly from an internal development perspective. And that has been the key issue is, I think, and I think Andre touched upon a bit about that, is about how do we ensure that we simplify our own infrastructure, the bank's infrastructure. And that's obviously a journey banks like Nordea are in for many years, and we try to simplify our infrastructure in the 4 Nordic countries, making sure that we have a more agile setup, a more scalable and a more future-proof setup from a payment perspective. And obviously one of the benefit of having that, let's say, Nordic setup is that you are more agile, that you are able to not only make sure that you are compliant and make sure that you have the done and resilient, but also that you can build on top of the infrastructure easier and cheaper and faster. And that's one of the things we are trying to achieve with our simplification project in Nordea, is to reduce the spaghetti, reduce the legacy, and create more Nordic infrastructures. But that's more an inward-looking part. But for me, it's also very important with that we are enabling a simplification for our customers. So we will have, and that's the ambition and strategy from a Nordea perspective. We will have, as I call it, a Nordic experience for our customers. One experience wherever in all the 4 countries for the same service, the same type of channels, the same type of customer service, the same type of service levels, pricings, etc., so that we have a truly one Nordic experience on the back of our own ability to deliver a Nordic platform.
I think, as you mentioned, that Nordic platform is so critical to your guys' success, and it's brilliant to hear. And Andre, obviously, I believe Intix, based in Belgium, and I'm really interested to hear maybe your perspective of how the banks in that region have looked to this kind of modular approach, and getting a bit more of that perspective, please.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear P27, as Tino said, is all about indeed providing the regional experience and moving the consumer and the corporates to a real-time experience across borders, because that's what we see indeed across many of the new entrants in cross-border payments. Is all about making those payments become instant, not within the boundaries of a particular country, but really across borders. And this is going to be reality here with P27. And this is putting pressure on banks tremendously, because the internal infrastructure of banks has to cater now for such real-time processing. And for many banks, there are risks of not being able to catch up with those developments. We talk about SWIFT GPI, ISO 22, and here P27, real-time payments is impacting back office processing tremendously. So there is a reputational risk for banks not to be able to process those payments, or at least being able to process those, but fail on a few. And those few, because of the increased transparency that all those new payment innovations are offering to correspondent banks, to clients, everything becomes tracked, visible, then you basically still have a risk of failing some transactions. And that's where Intix can help indeed across all of those innovations, those values, those specific transactions that are at risk of being failed, or those service levels in terms of processing times that also can be failed, can be tracked by Intix and alerted in real time as well, so that action can be taken by banks before clients or correspondent banks are impacted. So tracking your own internal operations is key to protect yourself as a financial institution against those reputational risks, those new transparency risks, as we call them. And this is key indeed going forward across all of those payments innovations. More and more banks will be scored, because those innovations will score banks according to their performance, because you can be good in most cases, but in some cases be less good. So all of those measures will be transformed by platforms into scores. And that also is something that banks need to protect themselves against, because it's influencing their reputation. So this is where tracking the internal operations is definitely important. And this is where Intix helps indeed by complementing the innovations provided by the P27, the SWIFT GPI, and many others with the internal capability to track your own operations and be sure you are compliant with those new norms.
Interesting. Now, I think you've touched on a point that really kind of sums up the whole discussion, in the fact that there is a lot changing, and there's a lot of positives behind it that we can focus on. It's going to benefit everyone's customers significantly, and there's a lot to get through when it comes to the infrastructure and changing the way that we work within the banks. So guys, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for your time, and also to all our viewers as well. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at www.fintechf.com, and of course YouTube and LinkedIn, where I will see you in the comments. Andre, Tino, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to the next one. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank
you, Tino.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.